In 1949, Dorothy Forstein and her husband Jules were raising a blended family. With 2 children from Jules' first marriage and 1 from their own, their house was filled with the giggles of the older girls and cries from their infant. The family was idyllic. That is, until the matriarch of the family was attacked, then kidnapped, and never seen again. This week on Out of the Past, the disappearance of Dorothy Forstein. Dorothy Cooper was born in the fall of 1909. She grew up in Philadelphia, one of 6 children born to John and Della Cooper. She was naturally blonde and stood only 5 feet 2 inches tall. Jules Forstein's first wife had died while delivering their youngest daughter. He remarried in 1942, and they had a son in 1948. Dorothy helped Jules to raise his first 2 kids, Marcy and Myrna. Jules worked as a magistrate, and the family lived in a Philadelphia townhouse. Dorothy's sense of safety was ripped away from her in 1945, when a man hiding in the dark outside her house attacked her. She had only stopped at home for a moment, just to drop off groceries before picking up Myrna and Marcy. But this gave Dorothy's attacker just enough time to jump out and begin beating her ruthlessly. She tried to get inside. She knocked the telephone off the hook, but the man continued beating her. The operator heard the struggle and sent the police to the residence, where they saved Dorothy. Her shoulder, nose, and jawbone were all broken. The police couldn't figure out the motive. She had no enemies. She wasn't sexually assaulted. On top of that, Dorothy couldn't even provide a description of the man. She just said he came out of nowhere. No evidence and no witnesses led to the case going cold soon after the crime was reported. The police moved on, but Dorothy found it impossible to forget. She struggled with paranoia for years, always terrified that another attack was coming. She always made sure the doors and windows were locked, constantly fearing for her and her family's safety. Ultimately, Dorothy's fears were not unfounded. Jules worked late on the evening of October 18th, 1949. He had an evening function, so he phoned Dorothy to tell her he wouldn't be getting home until late that night. Jules arrived home later to find his daughter Marcy in tears. The 9-year-old was alone in the house with her baby brother, Edward. She provided the following account of what had happened over the last 20 minutes, as recorded by George F. Richardson, Chief of Detectives. I was asleep in the back room. I heard a door open downstairs. I went and looked over the rail. I saw a man come up the stairs. He walked right into Mother's room in the front of the house. Mother was lying on the floor on her face. She had been resting. The man turned her over on her back, picked her up, and put her over his right shoulder so that her head hung over his back. She was in pajamas. As he turned the steps, I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Go back to sleep, little one. Your mother is all right." He patted me on the head as he went out the front door. I heard the snap lock close. 15 minutes later, my father came in. Jules Forstein reported his wife missing to the police the following morning. Law enforcement assured the press that they had everything under control. They bragged about finding more than 50 pieces of evidence in the Forstein home. Unfortunately, nothing in this mountain of evidence led the police to the perpetrator. Marcy provided a physical description of her abductor to law enforcement. He had a brown cap with a peak not pulled down very far. He was about 40 and had something brown on his shirt. As the days went on with no sign of Dorothy, the press began to lose their optimism. A special 4-man squad was put together to help with the search, but when newspapers interviewed these men, they described themselves as being without clues. What happened to the 50 clues the police chief said they had? Was he simply exaggerating to make the police look better? Whatever happened, they were at a virtual standstill with the case. People wondered about Marcy's testimony, including her own father. She was only a small child. Could police trust what she said? After an interview with UPenn psychiatrist Yale Nathanson, it was determined that the girl was telling the truth. What began as a citywide search soon turned into a statewide search, then a 4-state search, then an 11-state search. Unfortunately, no trace of Dorothy could be found, no matter how wide the dragnet grew. Dorothy's family was torn apart by her disappearance. Her adopted daughters and her son were left without a mother. Her 5 siblings were beside themselves with grief, and Dorothy's mother became so upset she actually made herself ill. Time moved on. Edward started 1st grade. The girls grew up. This unsolved disappearance hung over the heads of each family member. There was a hole in their family that couldn't be repaired. The last words that Dorothy said to her husband over the telephone were, "Don't forget to miss me." Some immediately jumped to the conclusion that whoever had attacked Dorothy 4 years earlier had returned to finish the job. Others wondered if people who had lost cases with Jules presiding as magistrate might be seeking revenge. Based on old newspapers, it looks like Jules issued some pretty heavy fines as a magistrate. But could a fine really be a motive for abduction and possibly murder? It's strange that Jules didn't believe his daughter's story. 9-year-olds are generally trustworthy. It's not like he got the account from a toddler. 9-year-olds can testify in court. I can't explain his reluctance to believe her. Additionally, it's oddly convenient for the perpetrator that Jules didn't arrive until 15 minutes after he left the crime scene. Jules wasn't typically out that late. How did the abductor know exactly when to strike? Several newspaper accounts of Marcy's story say she described the man as being about the same age as Daddy. In my experience, kids this young are very poor at guessing people's ages. When I taught middle school orchestra, kids would guess my age was anywhere from 50 to 16. I was in my 20s. This doesn't necessarily mean Marcy wasn't correct in her estimate, of course. People point out that it was strange for her to associate the predator with her father. Some theories blame the father for the abduction, but what would have been the course of events that night? If Jules was the abductor in disguise, what did he do with Dorothy so quickly that he was able to return to the house just 15 minutes later? There's always a crowd that will blame the spouse, and usually they are correct, but I don't know what the answer is here. Jules was elected to a 3rd term in 1956, but passed away in his sleep just 24 hours after being sworn in. His cause of death was a severe heart attack. He had previously survived a minor heart attack in 1950, not long after Dorothy was taken. He passed after a long night of celebration. His doctor found him when he went to check on him after being unable to reach him by phone. Jules was survived by his children. Their son Edward had lost both his parents before age 11. It's unclear whether Jules was ever investigated in his wife's disappearance. In 1957, according to one article, Dorothy's children requested that their mother be declared legally dead. This is the only mention I've seen of a 4th child. She's referred to as Nancy and is said to be 4 years older than Edward. I don't know why she isn't mentioned in any of the other articles. Was Nancy just an error for Marcy? We all know that the oldest daughter, Myrna, was spending the night at a friend's house the night of the abduction. Marcy was an eyewitness. Edward was only a baby. Where was Nancy that night, if she even existed? Did she also witness the abduction but was too young to provide information? This is one of the problems with getting all of your information from 70-year-old newspapers. If a reporter made a mistake back then, it can cause a lot of confusion for people trying to put the story together in the future. This petition to have their mother declared dead came shortly after their father's death in 1956. Dorothy Forstein has been missing since that terrifying night in 1949. The case has remained unsolved for 72 years. I have no idea what evidence is on file in her case, so I don't know if solving it is even a possibility. Maybe if they obtained DNA from where she was taken, but given the description of searchers being without clues, I find this unlikely. Unless they were collecting evidence that was far beyond the ability of 1949 technology to analyze, we can pretty much be sure that the case won't be solved that way. People have blamed anti-Semitism in the police department and the government for this case never getting solved, but I can't really speak to this with the information I have. How does someone just disappear? Even if Dorothy's captors murdered her right after the kidnapping, shouldn't there be a body? But no remains have ever been identified. Tying a Jane Doe to Dorothy could potentially solve the case. Many have tried to match her to one of the nameless victims on NamUs, but none have been successful. The eeriest part of this case is the way the abductor interacted with Marcy. He was polite. He gave her a pat on the head. This is very strange behavior. All the doors were locked when Jules got home, just as Dorothy liked. So how did the perpetrator get in? Was it someone she or Marcy knew and felt comfortable opening the door for? Dorothy was 40 years old at the time of the abduction. She had blonde hair and was wearing her pajamas. This is a very upsetting case. Do you think she was abducted by the same person who attacked her 4 years previously? Do you think her spouse or any family members were involved? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to help solve cases like this one, consider making a donation to the Cold Case Foundation. They're always working to bring families answers. I'll have the link pasted below. That's all for now. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Out of the Past.